All right, Christofer here. Welcome to Do Explain. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my current supporters who inspire me to carry on with this project and make it financially viable as well. I'm very grateful to all of you. Big hugs. And while I'm not in the business of telling people what to do, I can share my vision for Do Explain going forward. I like to work on the podcast full time instead of just a few days a month. I want to build a real platform for the fun and friendly exchange of interesting ideas, and I want to do it ad-free if possible, because I don't want any ideas to be off limits for us to explore, and I also want to keep saying dumb shit without repercussions. But to do this, I'll need a steady income, and that's why I need your help. So if you enjoy what I'm doing here, and you want to join me in my vision and become a part of growing this project, consider going over to patreon.com/doexplain and sign up to become a monthly supporter. All right, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey, Charlie.
Christofer?
I have a great fucking suggestion for today's episode. Do you want to hear it?
Bullshit, but yes.
Yeah, okay, so how about you don't talk that much, and then we'll have a great episode. What do you think about that?
That sounds like the natural way of things. I'm cool with that. It's your podcast after all, but just
so
know that. Okay, sorry.
All right, so I'm back for the third time with Hermes a Reason, the only and one. That's not how you say that. The one and only. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing really good. It's awesome to be back as usual, and yeah, man, looking forward to what is unraveled here. What kind of wisdom we can bestow upon the feeble minds of mainstream rationalists. Just kidding. Okay, just kidding. We're all people here, everybody. Let's not be racist.
Yeah, wow,
okay.
You lost half of our audience now, so 8 people just stopped listening.
Oh, God.
That's
I'm
great.
sorry, Sam
Cool,
Harris.
man.
He was like listening up until that point. He's like, oh,
Yeah.
fuck this.
All right, man. So I've mentioned on Twitter that I'm taking an epistemology class right now at university. It's mainly, to be honest, because I need some extra credits, and this is a distance course, so I can kind of get more time to do things like this that I actually enjoy. Not that I don't enjoy epistemology, but the whole course is structured around how we can justify things. So it's the old justify true belief chimera again. And we have these forum assignments, right? So you read in some material, and then you're supposed to distill some arguments in your own words, and then you're supposed to reflect a little bit. And I went hard the first fucking assignment. So I just went in criticizing pretty much everything from the get-go. It was about skepticism, the first assignment. So I wrote basically an essay on fallibilism and Deutschian critical rationalism, and everybody in the group responded to my post. Mm-hmm. Like, you're all supposed to do one response to whatever post, and everybody just thought I was an idiot. I don't know, but it was, I really enjoyed it, actually. For the first time ever, I felt like...
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say the opposite. I mean, like, people are, like, interested enough to reply to you. I mean, like, yeah, probably maybe some of them thought you're an idiot or whatever, but, like, that's so cool, I think. That's, like, an amazing opportunity that, like, you do a thing and then everybody, or like almost everybody in the class, feels like that you're the one to reply to. That's fucking awesome.
Yeah, but, and what I wanted to say, you're absolutely right about that. I think that's the main thing. I didn't get bad responses. I got good responses, and most people were polite. But it was refreshing, firstly, to, if you are persuaded that you have the best arguments, you should ride them hard. Mm-hmm. You know, you shouldn't be too humble about it, which some people seem to be. So I went pretty hard, and that's something I love with David when he speaks. And he says things like, that's nonsense, or, you know, he doesn't shy back from the fact that some explanations are objectively shit. And, yeah, so it's really cool. And it was nice to feel like I would rather be on the side of being the one everybody else disagrees with than the 7 other people who are trying to tell the one person they're wrong. I don't know what it is about it, but it's just really fun. It's like you say, it's an opportunity, I suppose. So that's where I'm at.
I just want to say one thing. I think it's absolutely the case that we can, it's kind of bold and maybe somewhat amusing to be like, well, that argument is like totally shit. But at the same time, I think that Luli Tanit tweeted one time something like, everybody has a piece of the truth, but nobody knows who has which pieces. And I really love that because it's like we could be, you're the irrevocably curious dickhead, but we could be as dickheaded as we want. But at the same time, I think that it is the case, that people in general are trying to understand what's real. And it's just so common. I mean, you and I were both at the same, both were justified true believers at one point, right? But that's just the kind of common way to be. And
but do you really think? Sorry, I just want to push back on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you really think that's the case?
What's the case?
Like that most people they actually want to get to what's true.
I think so. Yeah, I think that, I mean, in the sense that people want progress, and I think I maybe said this, like some variation of this in our first episode, where I think everybody kind of values progress on some level, but there is just a kind of lot of variation on what progress actually means. And so people think that, like some people think that real progress entails holding back what we would call progress or something, right? Like I think Nick Bostrom has said something like, progress isn't always good because sometimes progress can go in the wrong direction. So people have like such weird kind of ideas of what progress are, but I think everybody really is trying to understand the world better. And even if it's like crappy, unsound idea like moral relativism, that is still an attempt to like what seems right to that person. It's everybody is kind of really doing what they are persuaded to be is right. And this also leads to another thing too, by the way, just to say really.
But do you
go ahead.
keep that in your memory bank there? Don't you think there is a distinction to be made between wanting to know the truth and wanting to know what's right, in the sense of, because I've had arguments. What I'm trying to say is I've had arguments with people where it kind of boils down to, after a long time, religion, for instance, and we argue and then suddenly they give up their position of, oh, I believe there's actually a God, and instead they say, I would like to believe there's a God. It makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm. But I think that's some kind of, even though it's kind of an appeal to feelings, it's an appeal to what they see as the truth or reality of those feelings, or what those feelings are pointing to in reality. Like, coming back to that Luli Tanit tweet, that everybody has a piece of the truth. Nobody knows who has which pieces. I mean, well, so the nobody knows who has which pieces part is one thing, but the everybody has a piece of the truth thing, that's not what I'm exactly getting at. What I'm trying to say basically is like that I think it's important for, as critical rationalists, for us to have an actual kind of, I don't know if sympathy is the right word, but something like an acknowledgement that everybody really is trying to understand what's real, no matter how wrong they are. And this is the same thing with, or rather I should say, this is, the all evils are due to lack of knowledge, David Deutsch's principle of optimism, that like, it's not that this even goes against, I think, the notion that, which is very common, that people act against their better knowledge. People are conflicted, right? Our minds kind of consist of all these levels of conflicting ideas. And I mean, that's always going to be the case in that sense, that we're always going to have problems, right? And because problems are conflicting ideas, more or less. Like, I don't think it's possible to actually act against your better knowledge in the sense that you really knew what was right, and yet you did otherwise. I think that if you did otherwise, you didn't really know what was right in that situation. You didn't actually solve the problem.
No, I think you're right.
And I think that's an important thing for us to have, because like, I can criticize the mainstream rationalists and Sam Harris and stuff all we want, but I fully give them the, the benefit of the doubt, in that they are all working to the best of their knowledge at the time. And so I don't want to seem like we're actually that scathing, even though you are the irrevocably curious dickhead. I want to maybe pull back a little bit and just say, let's love everybody, you guys.
But you're the unstoppable beta, bro.
That's my nickname. For those that don't know,
name,
I'm
dude.
the unstoppable
That's
beta.
so
But
badass.
no, I mean, but it's like, anyway. Okay, why are we talking about that? I'm trying to just emphasize the fact that that this is the thing that I said, like I said in the first podcast, that people really do value progress, but as there should be, in a sense, there's just a lot of disagreement about what progress really is and what truth seeking consists of and all that. So it's just an important flag to plant, I think. Because we're criticizing a lot of people here, or a lot of ideas.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, of course. But so, yeah, maybe we can go into this immediately then, because I listened to Sam Harris's last podcast with, I'm blanking on the name, but a very nice lady who, she had been married to one of bin Laden's closest associates or something like that.
Yeah, wow.
She had been deep into the whole extreme Islamism scene, and she didn't live a very nice life, and she was an advocate for women's rights when it came to Islam, not having to wear the hijab and getting to make their own free choices and not being slaves of men. I don't need us to go too deep into the Islamist rabbit hole there. I don't know enough about it, but something they said there was they touched on the idea that modern feminists in the Western world are completely neglecting that part. They seem to be hypocrites in the sense of they don't want to criticize Islam, and they see it as a virtue to so-called be tolerant and never criticizing that fact. Oh, it's their choice. They can wear the burqa, and that's empowering for them, and things like that. And she got very, very upset when they talked about that, because she thought that wasn't what they were doing. What they were doing was denying that these women that weren't living in Western culture weren't worth as much. You didn't care as much about their right to choose and their right to be living in a liberal democracy with freedom. And so I wanted to talk a little about moral relativism,
right,
and why it is highly immoral, and where is the line between just being ignorant about something. Like maybe these feminists, probably they're thinking they are being tolerant and they are standing up for something, but at the same time, it is highly immoral, and that's what's keeping these people stuck in these ancient societies that are closed and static, and that's horrible. We talked about that last episode.
That's a really good segue. The thing that I'm appealing to with what I just said, and that kind of we should kind of give the benefit of the doubt to, that people in general are trying to understand what's real, but there's mistakes are widespread. I think that the kind of more common conclusion that people gather from that type of intuition that I'm kind of advocating for here, that we should give people that kind of benefit of the doubt, people think that entails something like moral relativism. But that's totally inconsistent, because on the one hand, you're saying that, or not you, but these people are saying that cultures vary widely, and they're kind of, the moral standards, so to speak, kind of just are compartmentalized into whatever those cultures are. And so there's no kind of more objective thing. There's just kind of what's right for that culture type thing. But that makes no sense, because that is already a kind of overarching criteria of objective morality, to say that the way to be tolerant is to basically allow other cultures to be self-containedly intolerant if they want to be, or if that's, I mean,
you mean that claims to be an objective criteria?
It's implicitly claiming to be that. Yeah, people tend to advocate moral relativism, don't really realize that that's actually an objective moral criteria, but it is.
Right, yeah.
I haven't listened to that Sam Harris podcast, but that sounds really interesting. And there is this kind of appeal to the freedom of individual people and their cultures and stuff that these kind of moral relativists make in this case of saying wearing the hijab. I think they just don't realize that coercion and force is kind of actually the real kind of, underlying thing there, with like that in these cultures and these certain regions, you have to wear the hijab or else you get put to death or something almost as bad or whatever, and
or you think you're going to hell and you're told you're a whore or whatever. That's
right. But
not fun in and of itself.
But I think that these moral relativists it's just a kind of ignorance, and kind of innocence to the reality of like actually like full-fledged Islamism, right? Where like there really is this kind of overarching dogma that is like punishable by death and all that stuff. Like that is never good. Like I don't know how these moral relativists can actually argue that is good, although that we do know, I mean Sam Harris has said right, there was that one time when I forget where he said this, but he mentioned how he had spoken to like an advisor to the Obama administration at one point, and she had said that she just kind of defended the claim.
The talk with David, actually.
Oh, was it? Yeah. Okay, no wonder I remember it. Something to the effect of that she just kind of defended as far as she could go to some really morally awful kind of thing that, I don't remember, it was like throwing acid on the face of people or something like, really awful. And that she was just, this lady was like, and I'm sorry, I don't remember this person's name either, but she just, kind of kept saying that, well, that's their culture, that type of thing.
Yeah, there's no place we can stand and criticize that.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that I think that it's just a kind of confusion that a lot of people here in the West have. And the West is really kind of the only place where you have something like moral relativism, because everywhere else thinks that objective morality exists within their culture and that type of thing. So, and I think it's honestly, I love Western culture so much, and the fact that we can disagree about almost anything, I have sympathy for like that people kind of have this misconception, and it's cool that we get to, do this podcast and criticize those ideas on the one hand, but also just kind of have these types of discussions, although they can be sort of painful to have sometimes, because you just said that the person that was just on Sam's podcast got really emotional when talking about this. I don't think, like you just said that she said that that she thinks that people who like the moral relativists here in the West who are kind of advocating for people being able to wear the hijab. Well, it's not that people should be able to wear the hijab. That's not. I don't think that that's really what was in question. So sorry, I have to admit ignorance here. I haven't listened to the podcast, but being able to wear the hijab isn't a problem, but it's just what's the history behind having to wear the hijab is the thing. And I don't think that I understand why she would probably get emotional about that. I mean, when people talk to me about why people have to go to school, I get kind of emotional about that because there are some things that are just like really kind of close to our heart. And stuff like that, where it's just kind of like, oh man, like it's really upsetting that the world is this way in this particular domain. But at the same time, I don't really think that the moral relativists that she is upset about, of course, they don't actually know that what they're saying or advocating is kind of effectively dehumanizing the Muslims who wear the hijabs or whatever. Yeah, it is
effectively prohibiting our error correction in that field, and it's prohibiting us from actually helping these cultures to develop further. And it seems analogous to when the climate
alarmists,
climate alarmists. There's the word. All right. When they claim that we should halt development, and then you're not thinking about all the really poor countries who wants to be as wealthy as we are.
Right.
But so what I'm interested in here is, where do we draw the moral line where it is indefensible to hold a view like moral relativism? Because you can't just plead ignorance, especially not in the face of better arguments that I'm sure these people hear. I agree with you that I think they don't know better. Otherwise, they would know better. I mean, that's a tautology, right? But yeah, do you see what I'm trying to get at here? Where do we put the moral responsibility then? When is a person responsible for what ideas they're instantiating and what ideas they're trying to spread?
I mean, it's a really broad question. So you're talking about just like, say, the actual like impact that moral relativists say are having on the lack of progress in something like our understanding of the real types of coercion that are happening within the kind of more fundamentalist Islam sects and stuff. Like,
I guess that was just one example. I'm talking more in broader terms. Like how do we think about moral responsibility in relation to what ideas one has?
Well, yeah, I mean, error correction is obviously way up there, but that's another thing that just people don't. I mean, that's not a widely understood argument, and we're here doing this podcast because we've been Morty lucky enough to read David Deutsch, Morty, and I think that we get this stuff, and so our moral responsibility, as it were, is to keep basically having fun doing the things we have fun doing, like making this type of podcast and talking about these ideas with people and stuff like that. However, with them, I can't say what's right for I should say it's sort of hard to say what's right for individuals broadly, because say like a moral relativist, and I know a few, at least when it comes to this kind of cultural question, I don't know what their problems really are. I don't know what they're actually interested in understanding. And when I get into these kind of, emotionally fraught conversations with these people who advocate moral relativism, it is kind of immediately like upsetting. And it's like, as soon as it's immediately upsetting, it's kind of like, maybe there's a better way to seek truth than actually feel like we need to get bogged down in this specific disagreement. Like, there's got to be maybe more indirect ways of hoping that they are persuaded by the kind of more objective moral principles that we are persuaded by and stuff. And it's like, I didn't become an objective moralist. Is that a term? But like, I wasn't persuaded by objective, like nobody sat me down and said, Charlie, you have to get this moral objective idea or else, we can't be friends or something like that. I did this of my own interest. And I think that it's important that we give every individual the freedom to pursue their own interests, and that is the most effective way for them to seek truth and to live a more moral life and error correct and discover new things about what they used to think. So
yeah, when we talk about morality, usually we talk about our actions, what we can view from the outside, right? Mm-hmm. How we act in the world. But I don't remember where I heard it, but someone talked about it. It might have been Thomas Metzinger, and he talked about, could intellectual honesty be a certain relationship you have with your thoughts, like a morality for what's moral or not moral to think, so that it would apply to our inner lives as well. And I guess that's what I'm trying to get at here somehow. But yeah, it's hard to get away from the fact that you have the knowledge you have at a certain point, and it's hard to blame someone for that. But then again, we do for other things in society. And this gets us into the whole free will thing a little bit.
Yeah, so free will tends to be framed in this kind of accountability / moral responsibility type framework. And I think that the way that David actually thinks of free will, as far as I know, is the emphasis on knowledge creation with people. Like that people are able to create knowledge outside of their genome, right? Unlike other species that we know of where they're just running on their programs, whereas we people, humans, can create knowledge that is outside of our genome. And this is, I think, slightly different than the kind of more, narrow view that free will is only about kind of accountability or something like that. And so we'll I guess we're going to talk about the reality of abstractions here. So, another kind of common thread of the mainstream rationalism is that we don't have free will. And I was, bragging to friends like for a few years, like, oh yeah, we don't have free will, and like kind of arguing with people about why we don't. I was following the line of Sam Harris's arguments, but yeah, I did keep running into my own lack of kind of understanding there. But basically the kind of the gist is that, well, given that we are, and again, this kind of assumes the thing, this kind of pre-Deutschian thing of that humans are mainly running on the biological program. So if you think that human minds, I should say, are predominantly controlled by these biological programs, then it totally makes sense to think of free will as not a thing that's real. But if you know what people really are, or if you have a better idea of what people really are, like David's idea that we're universal explainers and knowledge creators, explanatory knowledge creators, then the view shifts, because that gives us this qualitative shift from the kind of biological side of humans to the kind of more tied to fundamental reality side of humans, in that the world is explicable and we are explainers. And
right.
But go ahead. What were you going to say with free will?
Well, Sam Harris's view, I was just like you. I was very, very sold on that. And I mean, it has a lot to do with how you define the term as well. Because I know David told me, of course, if free will is kind of an undefined term, of course it will exist in some sense, and in some sense it won't. And Sam Harris, he has this very specific view of the libertarian free will, that, yeah, there you have some kind of writer in the head that can bypass the deterministic framework of the laws of physics and somehow make ultimate decisions outside of that causal chain or whatever, something like that. And he often uses the line of argument that if you use your conscious experience, so it's pretty empiricist when you think about it. When you use your conscious experience, you can see that free will isn't something that exists. And he says that if you just sit and you meditate, you see that thoughts, they just come up. They just pop out of the dark, so to speak, the dark of your unconscious. And you didn't choose what was going to pop up. It just popped up. So, for instance, if I ask you to choose a movie randomly, then you get a few suggestions pop up in your consciousness. And so his argument is, were you really free to choose if something didn't come up in your head? If you thought of movies and you thought of Shrek, let's see, some Pokemon movie probably, and let's see, what's that little pig movie, that Babe the pig? That's probably what came up, right?
Yeah,
I nailed it. And yeah, were you free to choose Gladiator? No, Harris's argument says.
I think it's just sort of silly. Like I doubt that this is what Sam Harris says, but it's almost like implicit in that line of argument that when I hear you regurgitate his argument, it's almost implicit in that it's like, of course I didn't create the movie Babe. Of course I didn't create these movies, right? I didn't choose to create these movies, and I didn't choose that they were in my culture and that type of thing, right? Of course I didn't fucking choose that. Like, there's a bunch of freaking things in the world that I don't choose that exist, right? And that I get exposed to. Of course, there are some things that I do choose to get exposed to or not, right? Like, somebody can recommend the movie Babe to me, and I can decide whether or not I want to watch it. Or I can, like, ultimately, is the kind of real free will point, I can ultimately have the choice as to whether or not I watch it, because there is such a thing as, like, coercion. There is such a thing as, like, feeling sort of, like, pressured by my friends, like, oh, Babe is the best movie, dude. And it's like, all right, well, I guess I'm a little beta bitch, and so I'm gonna watch it. But it's like, but wait a sec, like,
it's badass to watch Babe, but
yeah.
But that now you're redefining the term, he would say. Now you're talking about the compatibilist term of free will, where, yeah, I'm not pressured. I have my wants and I can follow what I want. Nobody's holding a gun to my head. But that's not what he's claiming to talk about. He's claiming to talk about the fact that even if you didn't choose, you don't choose your preferences. You can go further back. You don't choose your genes. You don't choose your environment. So just like you said, you can't choose what movies influence you and what don't, and things like that.
I'll tell you why that's wrong as hell. So basically, and like you said, and which I at one point, used to argue with people about, and I, being a meditator, I have meditated quite a bit in the past, like noticing that our minds work in these ways that are kind of mysteries to us in that moment. It's like, what really did kind of, like, there are subconscious things, there are, like, feelings maybe in your body, or feelings that are like intuitions, and you don't really know explicitly why you feel that way, and that type of thing. But that doesn't mean that we didn't choose them, so to speak, in that, like, so if free will, we're talking about free will in this Deutschian sense that it's knowledge creation. The thing that Sam Harris, I think, is missing, and that a lot of people are missing, culture in general is missing, is this emphasis on creativity and how creativity as a concept fits into our ideas about our experiences and the world, people, and all that stuff. In that the process of, say, just meditating and sitting there, or anything, or any kind of moment of experience that a person has, is a moment of creativity. Like, as we said in our first podcast, to be recreating the world anew in our heads. Like, right, and I look out in my window right now, and I see this beautiful day. This is a recreation, an active recreation, although not, of course, not fully conscious active recreation. Like, it's very subconscious. I'm not, like, deliberately recreating the trees and the sky and the mountains and stuff, right? This is all kind of this process this program, part of this creativity program that's, kind of just running automatically. Like, the fact that we have automatic programs running on our brains, in our minds, doesn't rule out the idea that we have this kind of, on the one hand, just purely creative thing that's running on, and on the other hand, the notion that we can ultimately make a decision about, say, what to look at, or it's like, you didn't choose what to look at. Of course I'm choosing what to look at. I am literally like, say,
So this takes us nicely into reductionism then, because his mistake is a reductionist mistake here. Reductionism, basically the idea that the best level of explaining something is always at the low level, like atoms. If I can explain something on the level of atoms, that's better inherently than explaining something at the level of human psychology or thoughts or whatever. That's an emergent level. And firstly, there's no argument for why that would be the case. And something that I didn't realize before is causality. I mean, causality itself is an abstraction. And things like determinism as well. Like, and to talk about something at the level of atoms or at the level of, I mean, in Harris's case, it's even funnier because he uses neuroreductionism. He talks about how it's all neurons that's firing and we don't need the higher levels to explain it. But then again, neurons are also an emergent level from atoms. So why even go up to that level then? Then we can make the same arguments against that. But in any case, Sean Carroll had a nice argument against this, I thought, when he was speaking to Sam directly about this. He said that Sam was mixing explanations. If you're talking about a person, you're talking at a high abstract level. Same when you're talking about choices, creativity, and all these things you've been mentioning. Yeah. So you can't then go to neurons and say, oh, but when I, as a person, as an abstraction, is making a decision and I choose something, then it's all neurons. It's all these motor neurons firing before I even become consciously aware that. Yeah, but now you're mixing explanations. These things are two different ways of talking about the same thing. It's not like one is happening first, atoms is happening first, and then all the abstractions come to light.
Right.
Like, that's just different levels of explaining the same phenomenon.
That's a good point.
When you understand that, you also... and then you understand that causality is not just something that happens at the lower level. Like, you can talk about choices as part of the causal chain of determinism. Yes. And it's all a matter of what level is the best level to explain something, to solve a particular problem. And here is where I feel like Sam is the most wrong in this, or his argument is the most wrong, which is he's not solving the problem of explaining how people, why people act the way they act and why they do one thing rather than another. And he's saying, oh, but we can, there's no ultimate causation outside of determinism. Of course not. That would be silly to claim that. But if I'm asking, for instance, let's say, how is it that Charlie and Ole both choose to wear these hideous color shirts that are like all the rainbow colors, like they've been making love in paint with each other or something like that. And if you just say, because the laws of nature dictated that they were going to do that, or because these atoms bang together. Yeah, sure, that's true, but it doesn't answer the question of why you chose to wear that. So no, a better explanation would be maybe they're colorblind, maybe they just have bad taste in clothing. You know, these things, higher abstract explanations. And I'm joking. I think it's so badass that you guys wear whatever you think is cool, man. I'm just playing around, but
hashtag camo
but
pants.
That is still a valid point. Yeah, man.
That's I like that point. I mean Sam, so kind of what we're implicitly referring to here, there are these experiments which I think have recently, I haven't looked into the literature as of late, but there are, I was about to say they've been kind of recently refuted in some sense, but or successfully criticized, but the Benjamin Libit experiments, where it was measured that like these kind of neurons were firing when somebody decided to choose between certain existing options or whatever, that those neuron firing pattern thing happened before the person was consciously aware that they were actually making that choice.
Yeah.
And as you said, which I think is a really good point, that to explain the whole phenomena, as it were, you do still need to, you can't just appeal to the fact that there are neurons firing then and not then. You have to also explain, clearly the person who is their conscious experience of making that choice is lagging from the actual neurons firing, that has to be explained too. Like, you can't just say, oh, well, it's the neurons firing, and then that's it. We could just totally set the whole kind of conscious experience of the thing aside. No, what do you mean? That's what we're trying to explain in the first place.
Yeah, why did they fire?
Yeah.
And not another pattern in your brain or whatever. I've heard in many episodes the talk about top-down causality. And he is very reluctant to accept that idea. It has to be the other way around. It can only be in terms of atoms, and everything else follows from that. You can't talk about anything else being causal, because then it's expressed in terms of physiology. So physiology has to be what holds the causal power.
Yeah. Well,
what's missed Oh, sorry.
Well, no, you told me to shut up, but no, I was gonna say that that idea, right? The reductionist worldview that atoms is really the thing to appeal to. Is that idea made of atoms, right? I suppose not. And yet, it's still tied to it. It's not that we're trying to, as you said earlier, it's not like we're trying to just dismiss the idea of reductionism as, maybe useful in certain domains and that type of thing, or that, describing the world at the level of atoms is completely irrelevant. It certainly isn't. However, reality exists in kind of two different planes. Reality is this one big thing, but there is the physical and the abstract. And you can't say, right, have an idea about that the world is only physical, right? Without, that's still an abstract idea. And that abstract idea is appealing to an abstract reality that idea is meant to approximate. And then there's also the physical thing of all the atoms and all that.
Yes, this is very important. And I just want to stress a few points here. Firstly, if you want to predict something, which is kind of goes hand in hand with the reductionist view of science, for instance, that science is about prediction. Prediction is always bottom up. That is reductive. But explanation somehow has to be top down. Yes. For instance, evolution. It's very hard to explain evolution in a way that people understand in terms of atoms banging together. We could find a completely reductive explanation in the sense of we can predict what's going to happen, but it doesn't give us the information, the understanding of why. Like you said, why are these atoms banging together? And why are they doing this rather than that? And what does that mean? There's no understanding there. For that, we need higher emergent explanations. And like you said there with the whole causality idea, if you define causality as the laws of physics, then of course there's no room for anything else, right? But causality, if we use the distinction between hardware and software for our brains and our minds being the software. For instance, people talk about gambling and dopamine. Oh, we are addicted to gambling because of dopamine signaling. That keeps us hooked or whatever. But what tells the brain to release dopamine in the first place is the mind. Mm. And the mind is dictated by ideas. So an idea, just like a computer, the software tells what the hardware should do. And the software can't be reduced to the hardware. It can be talked about in its own right. Mm. And that is a fairly mind-blowing thing if you're used to thinking about the world in reductive terms. That there are, like you said, an abstract realm in some way that we're physically trying to, through our minds, through our brains, we're trying to, in a physical object, instantiate abstract entities and their properties to represent the world. That's goddamn amazing. I'm getting a little woozy now talking about it. But so if you heard a certain idea, if I tell you a certain thing rather than another, that will affect your physiology differently. Perhaps. And then you could argue from the Sam Harris view that, but that's in terms of what's happening physically, like the certain sound waves are different or whatever. But once again, what is transmitted through those sound waves or through writing or whatever is some sort of abstract information. Because I know David's argument is you can have the same information portrayed in different mediums. Like you can say it, that's sound waves. You can have it instantiated in a computer, in a brain. You can write it down. But the information, there's something there that's still the same, even though the physical medium is changing.
Yeah, so again, the subtitle of The Beginning of Infinity is Explanations That Transform the World. So explanations are abstract, and yet when we understand a thing, which, and understanding is abstract as well, we actually can manipulate the physical world in such a way. And so there is this deep relation. Like, again, we're not trying to say that there is like an abstract reality and a physical reality, and those are two, like, I don't know, very, very different things. They are intimately related. They're all part of reality. So maybe we should bring up just real quick, or to tie a bow on this whole thing, is that example, that beautiful example that David uses of how do you explain how the copper atom at the tip of the statue of Winston Churchill, how did the copper atom at the tip of his nose get there on this statue that's in London? And you cannot explain it by merely appealing to the trajectory of atoms and the Big Bang and all this other stuff. Like, you have to also invoke things like war, leadership, the tradition of building statues in that way, and a little bit about who Winston Churchill was and all that context and stuff. And so, and this is another thing that I think is a very big misconception about what it means to take on board a scientific worldview. Because people, I think, a lot of spiritual type people and a lot of people who kind of are illiterate scientifically, don't, like, they think that the scientific worldview entails this sort of reductionist thing, and that, oh God, like, it strips all the meaning out of everything, right? And strips like this kind of beauty of the world out of everything. And indeed, I think, I mean, people can certainly find beauty in explaining things in the trajectory of atoms. I'm no physicist, and so I don't really know too much about that in my experience of life. But at the same time, it's certainly plausible that people can do that. However, again, these are all ideas, though. These are all kind of, the understanding itself is an abstract thing. And yeah, I was just going to say that, like, people think that the scientific worldview entails this kind of, I think one way of framing it is like the meaning crisis, that, like, if we're all just kind of atoms in a void, oh God, what are we doing here? And it's just like, well, yo, I mean,
down, Peter. It's all right.
I'm sorry. And we're Peter. No, okay. All right. Shout out to Seth MacFarlane. Okay, but yeah, so like we're saying right now, but that's the thing. Like, this is why a big reason why we're here doing this podcast, and it's also just really fun. But because David has such unique ideas, such a unified understanding of the world and his worldview, where we're able to incorporate things like abstractions, ideas, meaning, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And kind of be about really understanding the physical world, as it were. And back to that Winston Churchill example, like, that all happened in the physical world. Like, there was this World War II. There were choices that Winston Churchill made that affected the physical world, even though those choices themselves are abstract. So there's this intimate relation between things like meaning, choice, like kind of higher level, as we are saying, concepts like leadership or whatever, that affect the physical world. And they can only affect the physical world if there is a relation between them. Like, if the physical world for some reason didn't allow for those types of more abstract things to exist, then and then have an impact on the physical world, it wouldn't be that way. But it is that way, at least in our universe here.
No, definitely. And like you said, tie a bow on the free will thing. I just want to say that one essential point here is also that if knowledge grows in relation to problems, and a theory is meant to solve a problem, then the idea of having free will, of being able to make choices at that higher emergent level, that is our best theory of why people behave the way they behave. And even if you were to refute that somehow, you can't just refute it and then we're in the ether. You have to offer up a better alternative. And to say that it's all neurons is a horrible explanation.
Yeah. How do you explain how we got to the moon, and how I see airplanes in the sky, and how we have the internet and all this stuff, just by appealing to atoms and that type of thing? And
yeah, and I don't think anyone actually thinks the libertarian free will that's not what they're defending. I'm sure David would say that that's not what he's talking about. So yeah, it's kind of it becomes a fairly boring worldview fairly quickly, because then your explanation is everything just happens.
Can I just ask, so like the libertarian view of free will, is this the idea that like literally everything is a conscious decision, like clear cut in that way? Okay.
Yeah, free from the laws of physics, pretty much. Like free of outside influence. Okay. You can just make some ultimate causation or choice or whatever.
Well, yeah, interesting. I guess I don't know enough about that's like what all of like that under the rubric of libertarian free will.
That's
maybe
pretty
I don't
much it.
Fully understand that, but I mean, but still, I mean, we still have more individual liberty than the Sam Harris's and reductionists and all that give us credit for. We really do have, as David says, this capacity for knowledge creation, and that's what gives us free will.
Yeah, no, that's a much more useful way to talk about it, without a doubt.
Yes.
So, and I wanted to comment on what you said before with the meaning and how the reductionist worldview can really strip the world of its meaning and its beauty and those things. Because I came from the woo-woo camp of Eckhart Tolle and Alan Watts, and it was all Eastern philosophy and everything is love and meditation is the truth and all these things. And there was something there. There's something to that, the whole idea of spirituality, of feeling that life is meaningful and mysterious and beautiful in a sense. That is valuable, but it's covered in so much dog shit as well. And then I remember finding, the Sam Harris more, he's integrating the spirituality, but other people like him that are very hard-headed physicalists, and it's very reductive, and it's all atoms, like you said, and there's no room for this beauty and all that stuff. And I got really into that. And I was like, I laughed at all that other stuff that I used to think. And it was all harsh and dry, kind of. It's a boring worldview as well. But so what David does, his worldview is encapsulates the best of both worlds. Because you can really marvel at how wonderful the world is and how fantastic our ability. Just the fact that, I mean, we're sitting here right now. If you think about how crazy it is that I'm talking, I have no idea what's coming out of my mouth, but I'm creating sentences and I don't know how this is happening. And like we said before, my brain is creating this whole VR that's fucking amazing. And there is love and curiosity and joy. And I mean, the world is beautiful and amazing, even though you can be rigorous and rational. Reason is no enemy to beauty and love. In fact, I would say it's the opposite. It's the way there.
Absolutely. These things are all, I mean, yeah, I think this also comes from the misconception that reality is compartmentalized and disconnected. Like, reality is like this actual one thing. And this, oh my God, can we just say, because you and I wouldn't be here doing this podcast right now if it weren't for, so in David's first book, The Fabric of Reality, he starts it by saying how he used to be told, that basically there's so much, or that in the ancient times, it was possible to understand everything that could be understood. And now it's like, there's so many things that reality just seems so disconnected. No person can possibly understand generally all things and that type of thing. And I was about to say, you and I would not be here doing this podcast right now if it weren't for David's refusal to take on board that idea that reality is disconnected. He was like, and that's actually, that's what it gets at. Like that people think that you either have to, it really depends on the problem, right? The context and the problem all matters in terms of what you're trying to understand. But generally speaking, understanding of the world, seemingly separate things can be connected and unified. And David lays out in The Fabric of Reality, the 4 strands. So it's Hugh Everett's quantum theory, the many worlds quantum theory, Darwin and Dawkins's neo-Darwinism, and then Popper's theory of knowledge, and then Alan Turing's theory of universal computation. All these things are actually deeply related to each other, and David claims that you can't actually really understand any of them without referring to the others, and that this kind of comprises of a sort of soft theory of everything. And that, it's just so freaking cool, man. I just love being able to not feel so discouraged by how much there is to know, and rather be like, you know what, we can actually unify what we know and continually unify what we know. And reality doesn't seem so complicated anymore. Like yeah, it is complicated, but we can understand it better and better by unifying ideas, not by compartmentalizing them.
Yeah, but that's just like we touched on before, that it's easy to think about one level of explanation as separate from the others. Laws of physics happens first and then the other follows. Instead of, everything is flowing at the same time. Reality is one, to sound like a hippie. But that's the case. And that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
So I thought we could try out a little new thing where we bring up some tweets that we've seen recently, and we can talk about them a little bit.
And now it's time for Christofer and Charlie's Twitter review. Yeah? Is that good?
Yeah, that's great, man. Note to listeners, we did not agree upon on that, but all right. Let's see here. You're so immature, bro. All right, so I have one here that a discussion I got into with Brett Hall again. God, that guy's everywhere, man. He's like
Fuck that guy.
He's like the plague. He's like the Twitter plague, dude.
The rate of
#cancel
explanations.
Brett.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
so let's see here. No, he's great. I love the guy. So Naval Ravikant, he tweeted, "Your trauma creates you." Very dramatic.
I'm glad you're doing this one. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then Brett said, nope, you create yourself. Insofar trauma has an effect. It's your response to trauma that creates some of your character. And you create that too. And then I responded brilliantly. No, I'm not going to read that actually, but but I love this because this is something I've been thinking about. I was going to say thinking and talking. Thinking about recently, which is how physiology and creativity and all this ties together. And I had the fortune of speaking to David about this as well. And he explained to me that there are two important ways that physiology can affect or interfere with creativity. So the first way is, for instance, if you're in pain, it will take up resources. It will take up memory capacity. It will take up attention. And that will leave you with less free resources to be creative. That's pretty straightforward, right? That's unavoidable in the sense that we are bodies, so we're going to experience those things. But it's a matter of, it's not different from any other problem to solve these things. But that's where we're at right now. So me being someone with a lot of chronic pain issues, maybe that can be an excuse for why I sometimes don't make sense or stumble on my words, right? Because I'm in pain. I don't have enough resources, right? So,
oh, that's sad.
And that's one thing. Yeah. And the second thing, now this is something more insidious, and this is something that we seem to be doing a lot and that we should probably stop doing, and that is letting our sensations and our moods and feelings influence our theories about what's true in the world. So this is something I've experienced a lot firsthand, where if I'm having a particularly bad day physiologically and I have a lot of pain and maybe I'm having sensations that are unpleasant, I take those to be arguments for why theories about how the world sucks must be true, or why I'm shit or whatever. And the world is one way, no matter what sensations or mood I happen to be experiencing. So David said we should be suspicious about if we're feeling optimistic after a meal, but we're feeling pessimistic when we're hungry. We should be suspicious towards both of those because there's something here that's not right.
Is the point that we're overemphasizing the kind of physiological impact on our psyche? Is that what is
yeah,
meant
like
there,
we're
or?
taking, if I'm optimistic after I've eaten because I have good sensations in my body, but I think the world is shit and against me when I'm hungry, then I should be suspicious towards both those theories because they are based on my sensations, how I'm feeling at the moment, rather than being objective theories. The world is either good or, like, the world can be optimistic and beautiful and all that stuff, even if I'm having a lot of pain right now. So the world, your view of the world shouldn't change with your sensations or your moods or your emotions. And that's something that I'm sure you notice that too in your own life. Like if you're really hungry, or if you have a day where your fucking back hurts or whatever. Other things. It seeps into other things, how you interpret other things in the world. And I've actually stopped doing that to a large extent so that I can actually be joyous and be happy even though I'm having unpleasant sensations. It doesn't have to say anything. It's really nice.
Yeah.
So that's all good.
Just to say one thing though, Naval is obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but trauma, is tends to be thought of as a psychological thing for the most part. I mean, obviously you can get your leg blown off in war, but how you interpret having gotten your leg blown off and the memory of it and all this shit, that's a psychological thing, right? Obviously the physical thing of you having your leg blown off and then you have to be in a wheelchair or get a prosthetic leg or whatever it is, those are all those things and those have an impact, but it's your interpretation of those physical sensations and that thing having physically happened to you and all that that plays like a big role in kind of what the trauma really consists of. Maybe that's been implicit in maybe what you've been saying, but I just want to make sure that that's explicit now. Why Naval tweeted that, I'm not sure, but it's definitely a kind of a gloomy thing. I mean, but trauma is like a real thing. Like,
to be fair, and I'm not sure if I agree with this. I haven't really thought enough about it, but Luli came in here because I hashtagged at Reason is Fun there for thoughts.
Not hashtag, dude. You tagged her, not hashtag.
Oh,
come on,
fuck. I was scrolling while I was talking, so I don't know. Yeah. Snoop chat and
oh, your back
Instagram
hurts and you're
all those
Swedish.
things.
Yeah. Okay, right.
Let's see if I can find it here. So here it was. So she came to his defense a little bit and said that, let's see here. Oh, she did say, please do a podcast, meaning me and Brett. And I said, never. I'll turn Buddhist before I have Brett on. But the Buddha, that joke is based on all the other things we said. So you have to go see the
I didn't
thread.
see
that.
that.
Funny. Yeah,
Nice.
so she said this. All true enough, but I think Naval's original point was merely that unexpectedly much of life gets created in response to trauma.
Okay.
I'm not sure that was his point, but if that is, I don't have anything against it.
Right. I think that's actually that makes sense. But yeah, and I don't know Naval's thinking worldview that well. I know do I follow him on Twitter? I don't know, but I obviously I know about him. But so we should definitely, maybe we can have our own podcast about this at some point, and maybe you could talk to Luli more about it. But yeah, trauma really is like a totally real thing, and I think it's true. I think even that we underestimate the role of being, universal explainers, knowledge creators, super learners, right? And that being stamped out of us at various points in our life, which is what the trauma is. The trauma is essentially equivalent to our knowledge creating capacity and the authenticity of that creative capacity being stamped out of us at certain times. And that does have an impact in the sense that, like the thing is that this is the kind of intimate relation between culture and our creativities, in that when culture dictates this idea that says, say, like, if you're fat, you're a loser, and
that's true though.
You're that's true.
I'm joking.
No. But if if culture says that or whatever, our creativity is going to put creative resources, as it were, into kind of like instantiating and taking that idea sort of seriously, and then it gets kind of like, it tries to get integrated into the rest of what we think we know, and then connects to other things that we try to do and stuff. And so, I mean, our creativity kind of gets used for cultural things like saying that you're a bad person and those types of kind of quintessential type ideas that hold us back from being as creative as we could be. So like trauma isn't just getting your leg blown off in war, or even maybe getting raped, or those kind of traditional things about how to think about trauma. It's also like this very deeply psychological thing that I don't know, David, I'm not sure, because he's writing his next book on irrationality. I'm not sure how much he's going to get into this there. I would imagine quite a bit, but David has this idea of coercion, that coercion is this thing that, is, as far as I know, it's this result of kind of these certain things in culture, like where you have to kind of suffer in order to get what you want. You know, like our parents tend to teach us this type of thing, and school tends to teach us this type of thing. It's a cultural thing, right? I'm not blaming my teachers or my parents. I'm blaming culture. So then our creativity creative resources get put into perpetuating these kind of coercive ways of living our own lives, rather than, as we said at the beginning, like you know, with the people who like what do we do about the people who are like moral relativists and all that, and I said something like, you know, that we kind of just got to let them figure it out for themselves in some sense, right? Like that's how our minds work. And Popper came up with this, you know, analogy with that our minds are more like searchlights rather than buckets. And school and a lot of most rather forms of parenting and a lot of things in culture, a lot of the ways that people argue with each other, take on board this idea that all of our minds are like buckets, and all you got to do is like pour the right kind of liquid into their bucket, and then they'll get it, and that type of thing. But really, we're always looking out into the world and seeing and recreating the world in our own minds, and seeing only what we know to see. Popper's all experience is theory laden, or all observation is theory laden idea that we're when we look out in the world, we're kind of interpreting it in our own way, and a lot of our trauma comes from the misconception that our minds are more like buckets than searchlights, that people and we ourselves treat our own minds as like we have to have this information forced onto us, rather than we look out in the world and solve our own problems and that type of thing. So a lot of trauma comes from this culture of misunderstanding how the mind and how learning actually works. It's more like a searchlight rather than a bucket.
It's a really shitty situation to be in. You have a strong physiological response, and then you have a bad interpretation of that response that probably says something about who you are. And maybe I've heard people talk about in rape cases how they deserved it, how it was their fault, or things like this, that you're self-perpetuating that cycle, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think, I had a customer the other day at work who said that, she was maybe a middle-aged woman, and she was like, I'm so bad at math. I've always been so horrible at math. I can't count, or something like that. And
exactly.
I talked a little with her, and it turned out her teacher had told her that. And so she's installed this app in her head called I Can't Count app, and then she's just reinforcing that all throughout her life, and that ends up with her not being able to count, because she will never even try to learn. It's just a matter of knowledge. But if you don't know that, then of course you're never going to be able to count if you keep thinking that. And that actually segues very nicely into the next tweet that I want to bring up, because, and this is my own tweet, and I that is so incredibly self-congratulatory, but
wow.
it's not that because the tweet is good. It's because I tweeted it because I really have been thinking about this and enjoying it. And it goes like this. I love the fact that my new default thought when facing a difficult problem has become, dude, no worries. Universal problem solver, baby. And that is just the opposite of the thinking involved when you're stuck in a trauma, or when you feel like you can't accomplish anything, or you're depressed or whatever. The fact that you don't look at certain people as, that guy's a problem solver, but I could never do that. You understand that I can solve any problem any other person can solve if I want to, and if I put my mind to it. I mean, I might not solve it. It's not a guarantee, but the capacity is there. And it's just so goddamn hopeful. I just love having that default thought instead of, oh my God, this is insurmountable. I'll never be able to solve this problem.
Yes.
And it helps with learning. It helps with learning when you go into it knowing that I could learn this. What's that?
No, I agree. I would imagine it would help with learning. And I just want to say one thing, though, that there's this clip of Steve Jobs, right, who says something like, once you realize that everything in the world was created by people no smarter than you, then you can kind of do anything. Like that's like the most liberating thing. And what he's getting at there, even though surely Steve Jobs never was a Deutschian or that type of thing, but that we are indeed or I should say general purpose problem solvers and general purpose learners, general purpose explainers. I think that's what Steve Jobs means in that it's like he has some kind of understanding of what people are, and that's so key. And that I think what you're saying with that idea, how it helps you so much, and that you're actually a universal problem solver or whatever, and that I think that and coming back to that Naval tweet, the only reason why that doesn't resonate with people is because of things like trauma or trauma-related things that stamped out of us the idea that we can general purposely solve our problems, or any problem that we want to, or any problem that we put our mind to.
Yeah. You can understand when people say things like, I hate these kind of platitudes, but oh, my mom always said, oh, oh no, you're perfect the way you are, or all these things. And I never liked that because no, of course I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But in a sense, there is a sense where we all are perfect to begin with. We all have the capacity. It's not something we have to somehow try to get or build up for ourselves. We all have the capacity to start with, and then we cover it up. Like the old metaphor of the sun is always shining, but then there are clouds in the way or whatever. But there is something to that. And it's really nice to know that if I just stopped running these irrational loops in my head that are hindering me from being creative, I will naturally be creative. It's the natural state of a person. And that is just beautiful because you're no longer working in an uphill battle, right? You know that, oh shit, I just have to stop running in the wrong way in the escalator or whatever, and I can just roll with it the right way.
I think what your mom and even my mom, I think, who says something very similar, like, and it's a very kind of mommy thing type to say, right? Like that you're perfect and all this stuff. Like, I think what they really mean is just that you're good. It doesn't mean, not necessarily perfect. Like you and I are critical rationalists, so we hear the word perfect, like, what? Wait a minute, I have no more problems to solve? I want to solve problems, Mom. Yeah, right. I am fallible, though. Come on, give me that. No, I think what they're really trying to say is that we're really good. We're actually good fundamentally. And I totally agree with that. I think that's kind of what I said earlier too, in that everybody really does want to know what's real and wants to make progress. And in that sense, everybody is good. But fallible and all too often, maybe not all too often, but just, by definition, mistaken, fallible. People are fallible. Our ideas are always laden with misconceptions and all that type of thing. However, we all are really genuinely trying to understand what's real. Even something, I think, like an anarchist who, like a moral and otherwise type of anarchist, to take that on board, they have to really be persuaded by that being some kind of objective thing. So our moms are right, but they're just not using the right terms. But anyway.
Hey, thanks, moms. I mean,
thanks, moms.
I feel like that's a great and optimistic point to end this episode on. So, yeah, Charlie, it's always fun to have you on, and I can't wait for our next episode already. I get more and more excited every time we speak about these ideas. It's so fucking exciting, man.
I love it. Yeah, me too. I am looking forward to next time. Sounds great, man. Really fun being on again.
Stay cool, dude. Later.
You too, brother. Later, guys. Bye, everybody. Bye. Bye, Mom.